We've got another fresh business problem for Rocketblock's experts to solve in today's mock interview. Watch as candidate Ben does some structured problem solving, analyzes some charts, and does some quick math to try and help find a solution for the client. As a reminder, if you want to improve your skills, you need to be practicing actively and deliberately. You're welcome to leave your framework as a comment on this video, and if you're one of the first few comments, we'll leave some feedback for you. Good luck and have fun casing.
Your client is Laing O'Rourke, the UK's largest private construction company. The UK construction market is facing a severe workforce shortage. It is impacting Laing O'Rourke so severely that last year they had to turn down a record-breaking number of potential jobs. They are looking for your help to identify a long-term strategy to overcome this obstacle and remain the market leader in the industry for decades to come.
Interesting. I used to live in the UK. Tessa, I know you did as well. This hits home. I was there during Brexit, and I actually remember this being a point of conversation that, less skilled workforce may not be able to enter and fill a lot of these jobs. So, maybe we're seeing some knock-on effects, but, maybe I can kind of read it back to you, just make sure I didn't miss any points. So, Laing O'Rourke, I'm going to probably pronounce that and mispronounce that at some point, has some workforce shortage issues. So, they are the UK's largest private construction company. Sounds like this might be, an entire industry-wide issue. Maybe we can get into that a bit later. They're turning down a number of projects, which is never a good sign and probably not sustainable if, someone else is now going to go and scoop up that work. And it sounds like they want something that's more long-term, not just necessarily a quick fix. Is that a fair statement?
You've got it exactly. Yep.
Excellent. So certainly a few questions there that I might have even already alluded to, but I suppose first is this indeed something that other firms are facing? Is this actually industry-wide issue, or is it really just them?
Yes, great question. The challenges are widespread across the UK construction sector. One industry report that we've seen actually notes that at any given time, there are over 450,000 unfilled jobs in the UK construction sector. So this is a very big industry-wide problem.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how large the industry is itself, but 450,000 is certainly significant. Has Lang tried anything to date? Have they tried to solve this themselves? I imagine they have before they hired on a consulting firm, but if they have, what have they tried so far to incentivize or to, retain this workforce?
Yeah, great. So they have tried short-term measures to win resources from other construction firms. For example, they've actually increased wages across their workforce by 10%, and they implemented signing bonuses for new apprentices to join them instead of joining someone else. However, they've now realized that this is only a short-term solution, as the issue is so widespread across the industry, as we've noted. They believe that really what they'll need is a more systematic change in the industry, and that as the market leader, they are most likely best positioned to make this change.
That's so interesting. I mean, so if they're doing this, I imagine the competitors are doing this, is then just lifting the cost of labor, which I imagine then is just compressing their margins. So interesting. Okay, fantastic. I think that gives me a really good place to start. If I can just maybe take, a minute or so, gather my thoughts, and I'll tell you, what I'm thinking about.
That would be great.
Excellent. Okay, Tessa, I think I have kind of a rough idea how I want to approach this, and I'm going to do it in two primary ways, and I'm going to kind of like bring it all together in a third. So, first I want to look at the UK construction market, just, holistically see kind of where the problems or issues are. I then want to look at our client themselves, Lang, and kind of like review, where is the opportunity cost? What is the financial impact they're facing? So, how much can they invest into this? And then finally, let's do an opportunity analysis and just say, which direction we should potentially go. So let's take a look at the UK construction market first. I want to evaluate the existing initiatives already. So it sounds like they've already done a few things in terms of internally. Our client has done some internal things, but across the market, I imagine everyone's probably raising salaries and costs. I also want to look at, what are trade associations doing? What are schools doing to upskill this workforce? I know trade schools are usually underfunded, but, huge opportunity there. I also then want to benchmark what are other successful workforce programs that have occurred in the UK, or maybe even outside of the UK, for other companies, other countries. So, what is everyone else doing this? The US has certainly had this issue for some time as well. What are we doing to upscale, and is it successful that, they can take it to the UK? Finally, for the market piece, I want to segment. So I want to ID what are the critical gaps in the geographies and education and skill level. So, where can we actually hone in on what the problem is that could be then impacting Lang? Okay. On that note, let's get to Lang. So, what's the actual opportunity cost right now? So, you had referenced that there's a record number of jobs that are actually turning away. I imagine if everyone's experiencing this, probably everyone's doing this, but maybe one or two companies are then coming in and scooping up all this great opportunity. So, let's actually quantify the lost opportunities. So, what's the projected decline? What's the typical revenue we're giving up? So we can understand, how much can we invest back into this for that kind of break-even concept. And then, let's actually pinpoint the gaps from this. So what are the acute gaps? What are the barriers? So is it high demand? Is it regional? Is it Brexit and visas? Like what is actually leading to this? All right, and that finally leads us to kind of like where we're going with this. Let's do an opportunity analysis. Can we expand the workforce supply piece? So can we invest in more training centers? Can we do more apprenticeship programs? Can we sponsor visas to attract people from, Eastern Europe or other areas in Europe? And, maybe eventually even from like the Americas and Asia. And then there's a second piece of this, can we reduce the workforce demand in a sense of can we automate more work? I've seen great videos of 3D printers coming in and automating a lot of that development process too. So I imagine there's a huge productivity boom that could be made through good investment in technology, and hopefully we'll know based on the lost revenue right now how much we could eventually, potentially invest into this. If I had to think about kind of where I want to start though, I'd really want to go back to that UK construction market review and understand, where's this problem stemming from? How big is this problem? Before we get into kind of the Lang side, do we have any data on the market piece?
That's awesome. Yeah. And just before we get into that, I'd love to. You mentioned a number of different drivers throughout that framework, which is great. If you sort of had to think about those different areas that you want to look into and the drivers that you mentioned, is there one area that you expect to sort of have more weight in terms of finding what the solution is going to be, or that you really think is going to sort of be the key unlock to what we can solve in this case?
Yeah. So if they're already increasing the pay of the labor and they're still not getting enough people, it sounds like it's a real supply issue. How do we get more people into this space, or
Mhm.
how can we get more labor that with the correct skill set? So that's my initial consideration. I don't think it's a pay piece. I think it's a labor piece.
That's awesome. Okay.
Here's some feedback from Tessa. Ben does a good job to label his top level categories first before diving into the details of each one. This helps create some structure for the interviewer to follow as you're going through. Next, Ben ends his framework with a clear recommendation for where he wants to start the analysis. There's a lot of info out there on how to drive a case as a candidate, but one of the first tips is that you should have a point of view on where to go first as you're finishing up your structure. Lastly, Ben is positive, warm, and seems to enjoy solving this problem. It's important to remember that during cases, interviewers are trying to solve for two things. One is, can you solve problems like this? And two is, do I want to solve problems like this with a person like you?
So you had asked about whether we have information on the market. To
Yeah.
begin, Lang would like to understand how severe the potential workforce shortage in the sector really is, and whether that's something that's expected to make their workforce shortage worse over the coming years. An analyst on your team has pulled together this data from the Office of National Statistics. What implications can you make for Lang on the aging workforce?
Okay. Let me kind of say what I'm seeing, and then we'll jump into some immediate insights. So it sounds like left-hand chart, percent change in age profile. So from 2011 to 2021, this kind of 10-year gap, is that age range going up, going down? And then we'll move over to the right. First one on the left is percentages. Looks like one on the right is actual numerical values of number of construction workers in thousands in those age range. Immediate thought is it's skewing much older. So the rate of percent change by age is much larger for that kind of 50 and up, so 50 to 64 and then 65 plus. which is immediately concerning because that's when you tend to get into this age range of eligibility to retire, or more likely to retire. Maybe you're also then moving more into management roles or moving out of the actual like typical like labor role. So very concerning. On the other end of that, I'm going to kind of skip over the middle piece. The other end of that 16 to 24-year-old, 16 to 18, you're probably still in high school, maybe you're just starting trade school, but that's your pipeline. That's your actually like new bodies coming into the workforce, into that labor field, and that's going down. So that's not good to see that the pipeline of people going into this field is going down. For whatever reason, we can kind of get into that later. If we go over to the right-hand side, I'm just trying to, maybe quantify some of this. That 16 to 24-year-old, again, it's not really changing that 10-year gap. That 25 to 34, maybe that's 100, 150 people. 35 to 49, maybe that's 50 max. And this is now when we're getting to that huge gap of the 50 to 64. That's probably 265 plus, call it another 50. I mean, so it's really swinging hard in terms of the number of people, the aging demographic of this workforce is getting much older. A lot of people are going to retire. So, what's the kind of implication from this? You can't probably poach from your competitors. They probably tried that already, hence why they've been paying up, because this industry wide is a lot of people are getting older and retiring. So the shortage is really industry wide here from what I'm seeing.
Awesome. Okay, that's great. And so as you sort of think back to your overall hypothesis that you had, what does this say about that hypothesis? What are you thinking in terms of where we're at in terms of solving this case?
It's a great question. So the shortage of labor is truly looks like the issue right now. So fewer people are entering, if you had to think of this like a pipeline, fewer people are entering the pipeline, more people are either exiting or getting ready to exit. On top of that, those people that are getting ready to exit are already skewing a bit older. So if you think of it like typical construction jobs are probably not easy. These are not the people that are going to be doing a lot of the laborious activities. So you
Yeah.
really need to increase the number of people going into that pipeline. And then if you can, maybe shrink the number of people exiting, but more likely it's going to be people entering right now. Again, we haven't even gotten into skill sets yet, but we're just talking like general population of people even being available.
Perfect. Yeah. Let's get into the skill sets. So, in the construction sector, most roles, other than the roles of laborers, require practical skilled worker training, often between 3 to 4 years, including the apprenticeship. An analyst on your team has pulled this data. What further implications can you make about the industry?
Yeah, well, that's so interesting. So I'm, gonna kind of work top down, and I may not even get more than halfway. So labor's number one. Again, this is just like generally we need bodies, we need people to do this work. That's the number one by far. It looks like about, 5,000 we'll need over the next 4 to 5 years, which is great to see. But again, you need people entering. What's very interesting though is the next two tend to be very high skilled trade jobs. If you think of carpenters and electrical. I mean, I know that plus plumbing in the US is constantly something we need more of. And these are skills that usually need to go to trade school either for, multiple years or maybe less year, but then also kind of like sit behind someone and learn that craft.
Yep.
So the first one, much more short term. That's great. We just need to figure out how to get bodies into the pipeline. The next two, though, probably need more skill training in school. And,
Yep.
after that, thinking about some of these like civil engineers, surveyors, architects, a lot more skilled, probably workforce, and then director executives. You just need to be in the industry longer. So directors, executives, that one I'm less concerned about because, we have plenty of people in that 50 to 65 range that can probably start filling some of those roles, keep them around longer. The carpenters, electrical, that's going to be an issue because we need trade school. That's not going to be a short-term fix. Laborers could be a short-term fix if we can figure out how to get more people into this pipeline.
Yep, exactly. Okay, that sounds great. I think that once again, this kind of confirms your hypothesis here, just in terms of like what is required to get more people really in the door, especially for these higher skilled occupations that we're looking at here.
Here's some feedback from Tessa. When presented with a chart, Ben clearly and carefully describes what he is seeing and what it means. Taking the time to clear the chart, as Ben has done here, is a great way to demonstrate that you understand what it means and also demonstrate the client relationship skills. Ben does well to identify not just what the data in the chart says, but also what the data in the chart means for the client in this case. He clearly identifies what the biggest data points are, like an aging workforce, and then translates that into what it means for the client.
So I think we've like really accurately identified the problem. And as we've explored, the UK construction market is facing a significant shortage of carpenters. That was actually the second on the list after laborers. This is a challenge that Laing is particularly facing. So over the next 6 months, they will require 500 carpenters to complete the projects that they've already committed to, of which they only have 350 carpenters scheduled to be available. In absence of filling these roles, there will be serious penalties. Not only will they miss the revenue opportunity from the jobs, but they may also have to pay a 25% fee for already having committed to the projects. What are some strategies that they could adopt to recruit more carpenters and quickly?
Oh, interesting. Okay. Would you mind if I take, maybe 30 seconds or so and develop an idea of structure around this?
Actually, I'd prefer if you could just brainstorm sort of on the fly here and we can think about this together.
Okay, yeah, let's do it. Initially it's just started thinking about this as financial and non-financial incentives. I'm trying to think of the concept of carrot and stick, but probably less stick here. So let's stick with the financial piece, and then we'll get to non-financial. So financial incentives, initially I'm thinking they could do pay, so they could offer above market wages. I know they're doing this currently. Whether it is or is not effective, it's at least a good idea to lead with that, understanding where everyone else is at, and then how much more can you offer above your competitors, hopefully luring some of these carpenters away. Bonuses is another side to that. So short-term, project completion bonuses would be really interesting. So as you complete these projects, here's a bonus, here's an additional, one-time payment you get for them. You don't have to hire them on. But if you can then contract them out, they get this additional bonus for completing it. And then even overtime. So, as we have more of these projects and we're having to do more stacked on top of one another with less workforce, it'd be great if we could do some kind of incentivizing for that overtime. Even though I worked in the UK, I don't fully understand how the overtime worked. Here, of course, in the US, it's time and a half. So maybe we're giving a 2x for that overtime. One other piece I'm thinking about is maybe a percent of that revenue. I know a lot of consulting firms, such as my own, will give some kind of incentive if you help bring in that revenue or if you're completing it. So maybe a percentage of the top line or bottom line profit for that project. Again, kind of make them feel like owners are part of that work. Okay. Then I got the other side of it, which is the non-financial. So I imagine probably growth is a big or key driver. So I would love to see them do something more around career advancement opportunities. That fourth, I think, area under the skill and training was directors, executives, senior managers. So how do they progress potentially to that? So they're less labor and hands-on, but they actually see a career for themselves as part of this company. So bringing them in and saying, every 2 to 3 years, no different than a lot of consulting firms or other firms too, here's how you're going to see the trajectory of your career.
Yep.
And then finally, and I know I referenced this in terms of my, I think, initial framework, but visas. This is probably more midterm, so short term, probably less so because it takes the concept of sponsoring and everything, but grabbing people from Eastern Europe, but then also maybe from the Latin America, South America, bringing them over. I know the UK, you probably know this too. Tons of Brazilians are constantly coming over and they have great skills. A lot of Eastern Europeans too. So can we bring them in, offering to sponsor the visas, even maybe sponsoring some of their family members? You get one or two good people. Everyone has a family member that wants to come over too. So then you create a pipeline of that process. Again, that one's probably less short term, but we can probably start doing that in the more medium term. There's going to be a financial component, but you're incentivizing with this other lifestyle and experience in the UK, similar to what you and I had.
That's awesome. I think that's a really good range of ideas. You mentioned there just a little bit in terms of the financial component and sort of the cost that will be associated with this at a super high level. When you think about the situation that Laing is currently in with the contractors, super high level, like don't need to get into any detail here. How would you even think about like quantifying or deciding how much you would be willing to pay for some of these types of initiatives, especially when you're considering a lot of them, like this is a shorter term problem, but it's part of a longer term strategy. So how do you think about quantifying something like that?
Yeah, so first off, I don't like this because they've already tried this and it hasn't worked. So it usually just becomes a game between your competitors of just keep paying up and you're just all reducing your margin collectively. Okay, in saying that, if we had to think about how we would do it, I'd want to think about it from an opportunity cost perspective. So how much is this currently impacting us? So what's all the lost revenue currently? And then from that saying, over the next 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, Can we project out what that's going to be? And how much are we then willing to invest in? Are we willing to let this be kind of a loss leader? So maybe we're losing out on it for the next 2, 3 years, but over the collective 10 years, we're able to make X, Y, Z. So I want to understand what our typical profit margins are and what our typical like annual revenue target is. And can we collectively make that over the 10 years, but understanding maybe the first 2 to 3 years, we're going to lose that. So I really need to understand from an opportunity cost perspective and then determine, how can we meet those goals in the same time period.
Awesome. Okay.
Here's some feedback from Tessa. Ben uses a simple framework here of financial versus non-financial motivations, and that helps organize his thinking and his brainstorming as he's coming up with ideas. We've got an entire concept on X versus not X frameworks on Rocketblocks, and it's nice that Ben was able to find an approachable way to solve this open-ended question. Ben also does a good job to connect his ideas to motivations from what he's seen in his own experience. It's clear that even though he may not have direct experience in the construction universe, he's able to pull from motivations that he's seen work elsewhere in his professional career.
Well, let's look at the financials behind a potential opportunity that we have here. Laing is considering partnering with a local college to develop a modern methods of construction training facility. As part of this partnership, they expect to employ 25% of the school's 1,000 annual graduates as apprentices to supplement Laing's own workforce. How much additional revenue and profit might Laing be able to realize based on this hiring? And I have a little bit of information for you about the actual jobs that they are currently contracted for regarding those penalties we spoke about earlier. So they turned down 650 million in contracted jobs in 2024. And on average, for every 1 million in project costs, there was a shortage of one key skilled worker. And the average profit margin for Laing is 5%.
Okay. That is great to know. Okay. Now I know there's kind of like two pieces to that. And we haven't even talked about payback periods. So I'm going to probably start by calculating my revenue and profit impact, and then we'll kind of get to what does this look like in a payback period, and maybe even does that make sense? Okay, so you talked about the new hires. Maybe we start with that as part of this revenue and profit. So annual graduates, and you said percent hired. So we have about 1,000 annual graduates, 25% hired. So it sounds like about 250 apprentices annually is going to be our target, or the population we'll work with. All right, how do we translate these into kind of more of a revenue number? So you said one skilled worker unlocks 1 million in costs. So can I assume that's also roughly 1 million in revenue?
Yes, that's exactly what it is. Yep.
Okay, excellent. So 250 apprentices times 1 million equals, 250 million in incremental revenue. That's great. Sounds great on paper. And you had referenced 5% margin, brutal margin in this industry.
Yeah.
But I guess you make it on volume. So 250 million times 5% margin, 10% would be 25. Let's cut that in half. So that's 12.5 million in incremental profit annually. Okay. But you had referenced there was a goal here, not goal, 650 million was what was turned down in 2024. So, we're capturing about 40% of last year's lost demand. So still a major gap there. And we're also, making some assumptions here. We're, assuming the apprentices stay with Laing. They're not going to competitors. I guess we're also assuming probably demand for construction remains the same, but understanding, let's get to the end and then maybe we can kind of test those assumptions.
Great.
So back half of this, we wanted to do payback period. So let's do that next. So you had referenced I think there was a one-time training facility investment cost of about $100 million.
Mm-hmm.
Great. So step 2, let's actually now compare against the profit. So we have that annual profit of 12.5 million. I'm going to do the 100 million divided by the 12.5. Give me one moment with that. This is not going to come out exactly, so I'm going to do a little rounding. Comes out to about 8 years. Interesting. My hesitation is just, what that feels like. So I know we talked about, 12.5 million in profit. That's great. Only addresses about 40% of that gap. 8-year payback period. The reason I'm being kind of like, very squirrely is because it just doesn't feel. I was expecting it to be closer to 5 years. 8 years is a long time, especially if this is an impact. If this is impacting us right now, This is not, yeah, it's getting under 10 years if you just need to use those kind of 5-year benchmark increments. But yeah, I mean, this is something we said, trade school needs more time. You need more skills, especially for building the infrastructure to help that as well. So that's great. It sounds like you can start solving this problem given these assumptions close to a decade from now. Wonderful. But there's something you need to do for the next 5 to 8 years, because that's going to be a lot of lost revenue if you're losing 650 million annually for 8 years to come. So that's great. It sounds like an investment they probably should be making, given that I don't see Brexit turning around anytime soon. This will probably be a continued issue, but it feels like there needs to be something more done in the short term to fill that gap.
Got it. Okay.
Here's some feedback from Tessa. Ben does a good job setting up the math rather than jumping straight into calculations. He demonstrates that he understands the information that has been provided and knows how to translate that into the answer he needs for the client. Second, Ben does a good job of putting the numbers he's working with into context, such as mentioning the payback period for this particular investment. If you get hired as a consultant, you'll eventually be running a model with 9 different tabs of data, and you'll need to be able to communicate with your manager and the client the importance of any random piece of information. Ben is flexing that particular skill here. When Ben is done with his calculations, he immediately identifies what these new numbers mean for the client. As a reminder, math is a tool to help solve a problem. You're not doing math during the case for the interviewer's entertainment, you're doing it to help solve a problem for the client. Ben's transition to implications here shows that he was always viewing the calculations he was doing in the correct frame of problem solving for the larger issue for the client.
Well, that is unfortunately the only suggestion that we currently have to go with. So based on that and based on what we know about the case and the options available, your firm is being brought in to present its findings to the leadership team at Laing. How should they proceed?
Okay. So, given the goal of ensuring Laing has a sustainable pipeline of skilled workers to meet its work demand, both in the short term, next few years, but also more long term, kind of 5 to 10 year time frame, I think there's 2 immediate actions I would take and maybe a long term investment. So, initially, I would develop some kind of incentives, both from a financial and non-financial perspective, to bring in more carpenters and electricians. I would also develop more of a long-term visa program to help bring in those with the correct skills and just more laborers in general, as we're seeing that as the #1 need right now from area and neighbors around Europe. But that would also start a long-term partnership investment right away that we will not see for another 8 years, most likely, with one of the local colleges to build up that training pipeline. There are risks, though. From 8 years from now, we will actually not see that investment. So things in the market could gradually change. Also, if we're doing these kind of financial incentives, all we're doing is raising the wages, which is then pushing down the margins for ourselves as well as our competition. Mitigation, though, we can hopefully differentiate Laing as the go-to employer with these non-financial incentives, trying to actually make a career trajectory for a lot of these employees, but then also phase in the financial incentives, keep that kind of create a golden handcuffs approach where you start phasing in over time. So it's not just all at once and then they can leave after a year. As next steps, A&M would love to develop this compensation plan with you and develop, how you can do this over the next 5, 10 years so that you can hopefully start bridging this gap now.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Ben. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Tessa.
Hey everyone, it's Kenton Kavesky here, the founder of Rocketblocks. Thank you so much for watching this mock interview video. I hope you found it informative and helpful as you are getting ready to prepare for your own interviews and hopefully landing that job offer you are excited about. We have a ton of great content on the Rocketblocks channel coming out on a weekly basis, mock interviews, mini lessons, and chats with our Rocketblocks experts. So if you haven't subscribed yet already, please do so. There is a big red button below. And if you hit that, you'll get all of our content as soon as it comes out. Thanks for watching and have a great day.